So whether we use the direction criterion, the leaning against the wind with reversal, or the leaning against the wind with smoothing criterion, what we're doing is we're rejecting the hypothesis that there is any information content. Okay? So that's what we're having over here. That's true whether you have, sorry, that's on the right-hand side, or do not have, that's on the left-hand side, any concomitant news about the production. Okay? Now, of course, you're going to tell me, well, you know what? When you have news about the production, your sample size becomes really small. Yes, I know. I mean, there is nothing I can do about this. So apologies, but I'm not going to be hiding it simply because it's small. I mean, we're getting some tests, and that's that. Here's a picture that sort of illustrates the table a little bit better. So this is basically, was there a production cut or not? So if it is 0 over here, so the vertical axis over here is the situation in which there was no concomitant news about production. On the right-hand side, there was a production increase. On the left-hand side, there was a production decrease. Now, red is the 5-day post-announcement median return. Blue is the 2-day. As you can see, the pattern for the red and the blue are pretty much the same. But you know what? If I'm increasing production, well, number one, there clearly is not much of an impact. Second, if there is an impact, it's actually going the wrong direction. Because if I have a production cut, I should be seeing an increase in the price, and it's actually going in the opposite direction, and vice versa in the case of the production increase. I should specify over here that the fair price pronouncement that is being made is always in the same direction in our sample as the production change. So therefore, there is no funny thing going on over here. Everything should be aligned to have a negative slope, if anything. One, we're not finding any slope, and two, if there is any slope, it's positive. Okay? Now, this is a graph because, that I'm very glad that I put, because several times today we talked about the spare production capacity. Over here, this is a graph that basically I call the hockey stick. Okay? It's a hockey stick, but it became a comb, really. Okay, so this is a graph in which I'm plotting the surplus production capacity, the spare production capacity outside of Saudi Arabia in OPEC countries. So this is the non-Saudi spare production capacity, and this is the price of crude oil. Now, no statistical test over here, but I don't know about you, but I see two zones over here. There's the blue, plenty of spare, and prices are not moving. And then there's the red. There is little or no spare, and the prices are all over the place. Okay? That's precisely what we've been talking about, and in fact, coming back to the point that you were making earlier, is, demand fundamentals. When is that period? I have it from March 2003 to July 2008, but the 2003 observations are really over here. So 2004 to 2008 is over here. Now, what are the greens? That's August 2008, September, October, November, December. So you get the shock, you have the economic crisis, demand for oil drops, spare starts going up, and this is starting in January of 2009 through August of 2010. Okay? So what you have over here are clearly different time periods. Now, if I look and I superimpose this graph with the other one, of course I can't because, oops, sorry. Poof. There we go. So poof, poof, here we go. Of course, it's not the same scale, so I can't do this, but I can slap them on top of one another. And I've put down the first zone over here through mid-2003, right? Pretty much fair price is pretty much constant during that time period. Doesn't look like there's any information content. Likewise, over here, the fair price is pretty much constant, the same range always that gets announced, and the price moves up and down, but really doesn't move that much. And then you have this subsample period over here, in which clearly there is a lot of action. And so the natural question you might ask is there something different about those periods in which there is plenty of spare production capacity and the period in which there is not? And that's not in the version that is online, that's in the revision. And the short answer is no. Statistically speaking, we get exactly the same results whether we do it for the whole sample or whether we isolate this period away from the other ones. Okay? So that's what we have. Now, I told you that I was going to skip the Kalman filter, and so what I'm going to be doing over here is the ADL analysis. In fact, we run two. One of them is in the version online. We've done the second one. One of the referees had suggested something, and we thought we could do it this way to answer the questions. But basically what we're going to be doing over here is we're not going to be using weekly data, or daily data. We're going to be using monthly data, trying to get to the idea that perhaps what the fair price pronouncement is not about in the next few days, but it might be much further down the pike. Okay? So we try to account for that possibility. The fair price pronouncement is really forecasting or foretelling supply and demand conditions over longer periods of time than just a few days. So we do two things, and I'll show them to you in two batches. The first set of results, we use a model-free specification. By model-free, I mean we don't know what's driving the price of oil. What we're just going to be doing is regressing the current price on past values of the price. Okay? And what we find is that the forecasted prices are nearly indistinguishable. So, in other words, the ADL model that we have seems to be pretty good at forecasting one step ahead, providing one step ahead forecasts. Now, there is one period in which that is not true. And you can see this over here. So it looks like a really ugly graph. So I apologize for this. We need to change this probably for the published version. Rephrase, for the version that we send back to the editor with the hope that it gets published. But what we have over here is basically the dashed lines are the confidence intervals. You have the forecast, which is in red, and you have the futures price, which is in black. And so what you see is that everything is within the confidence bands, and we don't have a problem, except over here, starting in late summer of 2008 all the way through the first quarter of 2009. And that's the period when the price crashed and OPEC kept making, or OPEC-linked officials kept making statements saying, no, the price of oil initially was 100, then it became 75. But it turns out over here that even though that is the case, the fair price levels, if you look at them in that period, were worse forecasters than the 1 month ahead prices that we were getting from the market-based forecast. So again, doesn't quite tell you anything about the forecasting. Okay? Now, we went beyond the model-free specification, doing not a picture in this case, but a bunch of statistical tests to see whether adding the fair price surprise, which we defined as either the change in the fair price level from the last time OPEC-linked officials made a fair price pronouncement, or whether the difference between the fair price this is market price at T. This is copy and paste gone bad. Apologies over here. So the difference between the fair price from the last time you had a fair price and the difference between the fair price and the market price. Okay? So we tried to put this as a way to try to explain all market returns and to see whether it does help, and the short answer is no. So the bottom line over here, the conclusion that we get, is that it doesn't look, at least we don't find any statistical evidence, that fair price pronouncements by OPEC-linked officials have much influence on futures prices. We find no evidence of price reversals. We find no evidence of even slowing down the movements. We find no evidence that they help improve the forecast based on market prices. So therefore, it doesn't look like there is any new information. So you might say, well, going forward, that might basically tell commentators, reporters, policymakers to think twice before using fair price pronouncements as fully informative as something that we didn't know before. Now, at the same time, I don't want to go over and end on a note that seems to be suggesting that somehow there is no information in there, right? I mean, why make a statement if you don't have a reason for doing this? I mean, there's enough wind generated that we don't need an extra source. So perhaps, and that's where, that's not for this paper, but we're thinking about a paper further down, which is basically, which would take which would be a model in which we would draw on game theory to go and say, well, in game theory you have costless signal models, you have the cheap talk models, and you have the costly signaling. Now, in this case, what is the cheap talk? Well, the cheap talk is really the fair price pronouncement. But sometimes, what if you could back it up with production cuts? And so the idea that OPEC-linked members, or OPEC as a whole, makes a choice between production-related announcements and cheap talk, or just purely verbal statements, is something that would be interesting. Because I don't know many places in economics, and this is not just about energy economics or about OPEC over here, but in general, in economics, there are not that many places where you have, a natural set of data, the natural data set, to go over and test the predictions of a model where you could have that. And so that's probably what we're going to be writing next. And this is basically a quote from Oil and Gas News, an industry newsletter, precisely along the same lines. The end. Beep.